Hello. Miss Wooten's trying really hard not to pass out from exhaustion and fever right now, so she will do the best that she can. So this lecture is called How Do I Write Good Test, Quiz, or Essay Questions? Okay, this is the next segment in our instructional strategies. All right, so when we talked about in the last PowerPoint, we talked about the ways that students need to be assessed, right? They have to have tests or essays or projects or something in order to make sure that they understood what it was they were talking about, okay? And here, we're going to talk about how do you come up with those questions? What kinds of questions do you need to ask? And in order to answer this question, really, we need to know Bloom's taxonomy. We need to have a familiarity with something called Bloom's taxonomy. Now, what is Bloom's taxonomy? Well, Bloom is a guy. Benjamin Bloom is his name. And a taxonomy is kind of like a hierarchy. You guys remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs? A taxonomy is a set of categories for different types of questions. And Benjamin Bloom listed different question types in order of how deep of a question it was. How deep does the student need to be able to go into the knowledge that they're trying to master? Okay. Sometimes we actually call, instead of saying Bloom's taxonomy, we'll call this the depth of knowledge chart, or the DOK. And we'll ask, well, what level of question, what level DOK is this question when we're writing assessments, when we're writing tests and essays? So the deal is, at each level of Bloom's taxonomy, students are asked to do something more with the knowledge that they are learning. And this is going to prepare them for college, right? Because in college and in the real world, nobody's going to ask you to stand in a line and tell the definition of a word that you memorized, or no one's going to ask you to, no one's going to go over the moon about you winning a spelling bee because you memorized how to spell something. In the real world, people expect you to do a lot more with the knowledge that you have and to be able to apply it in deeper ways, right? So without any further ado, the first level, the lowest level of Bloom's taxonomy is called remembering, okay? Remembering is like this. Imagine that you go to a party, right, and you see a girl that you kind of remember from elementary school. Oh yeah, I remember her. All right, that's level 1 of Bloom's taxonomy. Now, do you remember her name? Maybe, okay, but do you really know anything about her? Not necessarily. You can just identify that she is somebody that you used to know, okay? Remembering doesn't ask you to go very deep in terms of the knowledge that you're getting. We talk a lot about memorization with remembering. Memory, remember, it's the same kind of thing. Memorization, if you memorize all the dates in your U.S. history class, that's great. You know, you might get a really high score. I know that U.S. history exam is kind of ridiculous. But you might memorize all the dates that important Civil War battles occurred, for instance, but you don't necessarily know anything about those battles. So it's just the bare bones of what you are being asked to do. Other remembering tasks might be defining something. If you've ever had a vocabulary quiz where you had to match the definition of the word with the word, you're just kind of vaguely remembering, oh, I think this word kind of sounds like it might go with this. Okay. Okay. It's not really showing what you truly understand about the definitions. It's just showing whether you glanced at your word list the night before the test or the morning of, right? Being able to list a list of things, list the different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. If I ask you to do that, just list them themselves, then that would be a remembering task. So I'll probably ask you to do something with them, right? Also, you know, which of the following choices in a multiple choice question does not fit? You have to be able to recognize the ones that do fit, and you pick the one that you don't recognize. So remembering and recognizing kind of go hand in hand. All right? The next level is understanding. Now, understanding is a level above just remembering, because here you actually you show that you know why things are important. You show that you have the ability to make an inference. In other words, to take the knowledge that you have already in the back of your mind and add it to the information you have in front of you and combine them to make a prediction or to draw a conclusion about something, okay? Understanding might include identifying examples of something. If you were talking about, let's say, people who have learning disabilities, we talked about in Teacher Cadet. If we talk about dyslexia, then you would be able to identify examples based on a description of which ones fit the characteristics of dyslexia because you understand what dyslexia is all about. Okay. Also looking for evidence, right? Being able to classify things, being able to understand. Remember that project in fourth grade where they had to take the different rocks and put them in different boxes to classify them, right? You had to understand the difference between igneous and metamorphic or whatever they were. You had to understand how they were different. Finally, for this one, paraphrasing and summarizing are also forms of understanding. They allow you to put that information into your own words. And if you can put it into your own words, or if you can find with summarizing the main ideas, then it shows that you have a firmer grasp. I'll give you an example of why without understanding, memorization is pointless. I had a student who was taking an AP course, not with me, but with another teacher, and the student could memorize definitions like nobody's business. She could write down all the definitions of all the terms and she could point them out, and if there was a question that came directly from the textbook, she could go straight back into the textbook and find the wording of how to answer that question using the information in the textbook. So she could remember really well. But if the question were not asked using the same words or phrases, she would fail the test every time. And in fact, she did not end up passing that AP exam because she did not really understand what it was she was memorizing. And in AP classes, just like in other college classes, memorizing alone is not going to be enough. This is why cramming and, just memorizing the definitions on flashcards isn't going to count, because you might have the definitions worded in a little bit of a different way. So you need to be able to put that information into your own words and to understand when someone else puts it into their own words, how is that similar to what you've already learned? Okay? So level 3 is applying. With applying, you need to be able to take what you've learned, what you've memorized or what you've remembered or what you've understood, and you need to be able to apply it to new situations. What would happen if this occurred in a slightly different way? What would be the result of this? What's going to be the outcome here? Use this information to answer the following questions. With applying, the best example that I can think of is math. I think this is one of the reasons why people struggle with math, because they cannot simply remember and understand with math. If you memorize a formula, great. You memorize the formula, fantastic. But now, what happens when I put half numbers instead of whole numbers into the formula? Or what happens when I take a word problem and you have to figure out how the formula fits into the word problem? Okay? Applying, you do all the time in math. It's a key skill to be able to figure out how to take old information and fit it into a new context. All right? And analyzing, much like applying, is taking information that you've remembered or understood and you're doing something deeper with it. With analyzing, what you're doing is you're actually looking at all the parts of something to figure out how those parts relate to each other. So with analyzing, one place that we analyze a lot is in English class. We would maybe take an article that we read or a short story, and we look at the parts of that story. We talk about things like plot and character and theme and conflict, and we study those parts. Okay, that's analyzing, because we want to see how those parts are related to each other. Okay, that's what we do. You also need to be able to infer what it is the author is trying to say in a text in English class. What bias does he have? What's his main idea? Analyzing is also something that you do when you're reading in social studies class or when you're reading in math class, you have to find out what is it that this material is really trying to ask me to do. So with social studies, um, you might look at a speech, a presidential speech, and you might say, okay, this is all well and good, but what is this president really saying here? When you look down at the specific words that he uses, what is he really getting at? Okay, it might sound like a really positive thing, but do I really agree with it? Okay, we might also analyze by looking at data. If you do a science experiment, what does the information suggest about the conclusions that you're going to draw? What information do we need to solve this math problem? If you have a word problem, what do you need to know to be able to solve that word problem? Okay, you need to be able to analyze to do those things. Finally, levels 5 and 6 are a lot of times pretty close to each other, if not shown as on the same level. Evaluating is level 5, and with evaluating, you have to be able to judge something. So like, is this good or bad and why? Okay, and it's not even necessarily an opinion. Sometimes you have to take a set of criteria and you have to apply them. So you have to be able to evaluate and understand in order to, you have to be able to um, analyze, there we go, and understand in order to evaluate. So I have my AP students write this essay last week. Does a poem by this author fit the characteristics of romantic poetry? Why or why not? Okay. You're going to have to do this on your research paper, might be asked to defend a position. Standardized testing is helpful or harmful to students because why? And you have to evaluate why your position is stronger than your opponent's position. Debating, pointing out inconsistencies, writing reviews if you have to write a movie review, which you might have to do later this week. Those kinds of things are all evaluating. You have to be able to use everything that you know to make a judgment about someone else's work. And finally, creating. This is the stuff that people tend to, I don't know if people tend to enjoy all of these things, but this is really the most important part of school, to be able to write or form a theory or construct something, design something, create something, paint a picture that illustrates all the different stages of photosynthesis, or do something where you are creating something new with the information that you're doing. Actually, that photosynthesis example wasn't very good. That was more of an understanding question. But if you had to create a new idea for a flower using what you've learned in biology about plant genetics, okay, that would be a creation project. Or write a play that makes use of Shakespeare's belief in fate and free will in Restoration England, or not Restoration, in Elizabethan England. Okay, you have to create something with what it is that you are learning. And synthesizing is also a part of this. So to synthesize, that means you have to bring things together. So you have to bring together all of the other information that you've read and that you've learned and that you've thought about in order to help you create something new as well. So writing an argument in a research paper has to use synthesis. You have to think about all the other things that have been said about this topic, right? And you have to bring them together to formulate your own argument or your own theory about whatever it is you're talking about. Okay, so that's Bloom's taxonomy, and we have to think about those things when we're writing a test. You can pause this. I'm not going to pause it, but if you want to pause this and look at it more closely, I do have one more slide really quickly, and it is, come on, there we go. Last thing I want to say is, when writing assessment items, just like with everything that you do when you teach, you need to think about your students' diversity. What are their skills? Are they artistic? Are they mathematical? Are they good at writing? Are they good at talking? Are they good with groups? Are they more independent? So when you are creating assessment items, there might be multiple ways that you can assess the same content. In other words, is it necessary that everyone sit there and take the same multiple choice test? Or can you give some of them an essay or a project or an oral report to do? All right? So some food for thought. And the next topic is classroom management.